Back to school is a big event for every school district. In Duval County, though, it's just one of the headlines this August. Will the South Bank headquarters finally move? And for school districts across the state, did book publishers rip them off? A lawsuit makes that claim. Plus, who gets the tickets that city leaders don't pay for? There's controversy in city council. We're also tracking the battle over the city's budget. And the Governor's Medal of Freedom bestowed on some people with Jacksonville connections. Our Hand on Government episode covers it all on This Week in Jacksonville. So glad you are with us. I'm so glad Chris Hand is with us, government law attorney and certainly friend to our show. The feedback I get, Chris, is when we do these shows that people learn things. So that's success, and certainly we learn when we lean into some of your professional experience. Let's talk about back to school. This has been big. Across the state over these last couple of weeks, kids back in school, but Duval County had a lot to celebrate and then some challenges right away, too.
Well, that's right, Kent. You know, we had a situation this year where all of the major counties in Northeast Florida happened to start their public schools on the same day, Monday, August the 11th. And that's always a very hopeful time of the year as students kind of start new grades and meet new teachers and look forward to the rest of the year, and certainly an exciting time in that regard. But also a period of time that, you know, people have to be watchful and there can be some challenges. And unfortunately, one of the challenges that we've experienced here in Duval County is in the first 6 days of school, 3 children were kind of hit by vehicles, unfortunately one of whom passed away. So this has become a huge focus with Superintendent Bernier, members of the Duval County School Board really trying to rally the community around trying to help prevent these kind of needless accidents that hurt students. And we've seen, you know, Melody Baldick, who represents, you know, kind of the Mandarin area, talking about the need for flashing crosswalks outside of schools and to make sure there are crossing guards, not just at elementary schools, but also middle and high schools. Cindy Pearson, who represents the South Side, San Jose, San Marco, talking about some of the particular problems like Landon Middle School, not too far from where we are at WJXT, and some of the challenges students have crossing Atlantic Boulevard and drivers not necessarily respecting those crosswalks. So this really is something that needs to be a community-wide effort to make sure that we keep our children safe as they are walking to and from school. And it's really, as you can imagine, captured the attention of the superintendent, the DCPS staff, and the school board to bring all hands on deck to make sure that students can be safe walking to and from school.
And so often we talk, well, it's about awareness. Well, our awareness should be heightened just for the fact of, okay, everybody's going back to school. It's right in front of me. My traffic patterns have changed because more people are on the road in the morning or the afternoon or whatever. But yeah, we absolutely, I think it's unanimous, right? Nobody wants to see kids in jeopardy just for walking across the street to get to school. I wanted to talk about where the school board building is, the headquarters, also not far from WJXT here on the South Bank, but we've heard it over the years, Chris, and it sounds like right now there's a potential vote to move the DCPS headquarters coming up maybe as soon as September 2nd, and the new location they're looking at is down really on South Side off Bay Meadows.
Well, that's right, Kent. Since the early 1980s, the Duval County Public Schools headquarters has been located just a short walking distance from this studio, but right on the South Bank in downtown Jacksonville. For years, there's been sort of community interest in freeing up that site for other uses. I mean, I think there's
because it's on the river. And
yeah, it's directly on the river, and I think there's a general feeling that maybe the highest and best use of land that's on the river is not a government facility. You know, Jacksonville had a long history of putting a courthouse on the river and a city hall on the river, and at one point public parking lots on the river and the Duval County School Board. So there's been an interest in moving it off the river for a long time. They've been in a very active process for the last several years, Kent, to try and find a new location. They went through an extensive procurement process. None of the options came out of that process were really financially feasible for the school board, but now appears they have found one that is financially feasible. At their September 2nd meeting, the school board's going to consider 2 proposals. One that would sell their existing building to a developer for approximately $20 million. And then they would turn around and use those proceeds to buy a new building in the Prominence Office Park, which for people's orientation, Ken, is kind of right at the corner of Bay Meadows and I-95 in the south side of Jacksonville. They would buy a new building, but buy it for $6 million less than the building they have sold. That is probably a high priority right now to make some money on this transaction because, as you know, school districts around the state, including ours, going through a very difficult fiscal period. School board, Duval County Public Schools has to close about a $100 million deficit. So an option that saves them some money and enables them to generate some revenue probably attracted to them, and I think that's one of the reasons they're considering this new office site, which would be in Southside Jacksonville.
Let me shift topics a little bit. City of Jacksonville going through the budget process happens every summer because October 1st, there's a new budget that's supposed to be in place. We've seen Mayor Deegan's budget proposal. It's getting scrutinized. That's a gentle way to put it, right?
Well, not to borrow too much from a Disney song, but this is a tale as old as time, Kent, in terms of the kind of back and forth between the mayor's office and the city council over budget. I think it's important for people to remember who controls the budget process under our charter. The mayor proposes a budget, but ultimately it's on council to pass a final budget. Our charter gives the city council that authority. It also gives the council the authority to set the property tax rate or the millage rate. This year, Mayor Deegan proposed a budget that had a flat millage rate or property tax rate, no change from last year. City Council has decided that it potentially wants to lower that property tax rate by 1/8 of a mil. So that would be about a $13 million change in the budget. So as part of the Finance Committee budget hearings, they've been looking for offsets, ways they can pay for that $13 million in revenue that would no longer be coming into the city. And that's where we've seen some of the skirmishes between the mayor's office.
Well, cutting programs like the financing for Meals on Wheels. I mean, they're the cuts that are being proposed to make up for that difference, not sitting very well with some people.
Well, I think probably with a lot of people, which is a bit of an unusual strategy. Look, this is a $2 billion budget. Having been part of the city budget process myself, having observed it for years, I promise you that in a $2 billion budget, there are places to save money, probably more fruitful opportunities to save money than these particular programs. You know, you talked about Meals on Wheels. You know, the administration increased that budget last year to try and reduce the number of seniors who are on the waiting list. This is, by all accounts, a very effective program, also efficient, does a lot to help seniors. It's also quite popular. So, you know, a bit surprising the city council has sort of chosen to kind of make one of its stands on cutting such a popular and effective program. Also, for example, the council has cut one of the other items in the budget was some money to help people who don't have health insurance still access medical insurance through telehealth. That was another cut in the program. So I think what's been surprising about the city council's approach is not that they've looked for places to save money in a $2 billion budget. That's something the city should always be doing, but that they've targeted these very specific programs. And what these programs seem to have in common is they were part of Mayor Deegan's proposed budget. So again, it's historically the case that there's some back and forth and disagreement between the mayor and the city council. This year appears to be at a little bit of a different level and on some surprising battlegrounds, areas like Meals on Wheels.
Yeah. All right, Chris is staying with us. I hope you will too. I got one more City Hall topic to get to. But also, Florida's alignment with President Trump's administration continues. The governor's new plan for an immigration detention center and how the Sunshine State may follow Texas and California into a congressional redistricting battle. That's next on This Week in Jacksonville.
You're watching This Week in Jacksonville with Kent Justice.
And our guest is Chris Hand, government law attorney, and we call our show Hand on Government once a month. This is that show. I wanted to talk briefly about something in City Hall, Ticketgate. There's basically a process where the mayor's office has access to tickets, handouts free to events at city properties like the stadium, the Jaguars game, or a concert somewhere else. Lots of back and forth right now, even to the point that City Council President Kevin Carrico is saying, hey, let's get rid of the whole thing. Is there anything unethical about this, or is there something that we should be watching more closely?
Well, Kent, this is, again, in the midst of a $2 billion budget where there's some, very pressing problems, whether that's attainable housing or the continuing effects of inflation. Probably perplexing to some that this has come up, but essentially just historically, as you know, the city and the Jaguars have entered into a series of agreements, whether that was initially to build the stadium or make improvements at the stadium. Now, obviously, there's an agreement to essentially build a brand new stadium. And as part of those agreements, the city has been given an allotment of tickets at the stadium for Jaguars games, which historically both the mayor's office and the city council have distributed out. Sometimes that goes to nonprofits. Sometimes those are used for economic development purposes and other things as well. This dispute sort of popped up in the last week. Former council president Ron Salem introduced legislation to mandate that the tickets be divided evenly between the city council and the mayor's office. There's been a lot of back and forth on this. And frankly, I think some community reaction in the sense of, hey, why are we spending time talking about, which elected officials get tickets? As a result of that, current council president Kevin Carrico has introduced an amendment to Ron Salem's bill that would essentially eliminate this practice altogether, ensure that no tickets of any kind go to either the mayor's office or the city council. Again, in the midst of the bigger context of the $2 billion budget, I think some people are surprised that council raised this, tried to make this an issue, but it is an issue now, and we'll track this legislation as it goes forward in the council process.
Let's talk about a state and federal issue that has collided here in Florida in the last several months. The Baker Correctional Institution, it's a defunct men's state prison. It's set to become the state's newest immigration detention center. Governor DeSantis talking about it in the last few weeks. This is different than Camp Blanding because Camp Blanding doesn't have an established prison there.
Right.
But this is something that, again, brings to light, hey, is the state going to do like federal enforcement of immigration law?
Well, I think some of the same questions that came up with the center that's located in, the Florida Everglades, Ken, are going to come up with this one as well. This is the second of these kind of facilities the state is opening. We don't have a timeline yet on when that's going to happen. It's at the former Baker Correctional Institution, which is a closed federal prison in Baker County, just to the west of Duval County. The capacity is they can have as many as 2,000 people there. The governor's indicated they'll start with 1,300 and then they can increase that number if need be. There's actually been, it's been somewhat controversial in Baker County. Fresh Take Florida, Kent, which is a news service, of the University of Florida College of Journalism and Communications, actually went up to Baker County and interviewed people, much like WJXT did in Clay County when Camp Blanding was suggested. And there's been a lot of negative reaction or concern about the prospect of having it there. But again, it looks like the site they've chosen is the former Baker Correctional Institution in Sanderson, Florida, and Baker County, to add to the one that's already in the Florida Everglades. Now, as we know, the construction on the site in the Florida Everglades has been paused because of a judicial ruling and concerns about sort of what the impacts on the environment might be. I think it is likely we're going to see additional litigation related to this plan to create the Baker County site. Some other differences with the South Florida one. That one, the state is potentially spending $450 million on because they have to build a lot of this anew and expecting to get reimbursed. This site, because there is existing infrastructure there, would cost a lot less, about $6 million rather than $450 million. But
that's a big difference.
Big difference, but still very controversial. And I think another similarity is almost certain to be the subject of litigation over whether or not the state is taking over a federal function and has the right to do this.
Yeah, it's interesting. Let's look at what's happening and how Florida might get involved here. In Texas, we've seen over the last several weeks, the legislature is saying, hey, we want to do congressional redistricting even in the middle of the decade, because usually that happens every 10 years after the U.S. Census releases data. We're seeing California on the opposite side now. In Texas, it's Republicans saying, let's redistrict. Now, California is saying with Democrats, hey, we're going to do this too. Is Florida going to be next? Because we're seeing some of those signs with the governor's office.
I think we're going to see a variety of other states potentially address this. This sort of started, Ken, as you say, it used to be the case that the census is done every 10 years under federal law. State legislatures would then meet. Based on the results of the census, we'd reapportion. We'd know how many congressional seats each state would get, and state legislatures would then meet in the year or two after the census to decide how those seats would be drawn, subject to some federal requirements. Now we're seeing more and more of this mid-cycle redistricting, as you say. President Trump suggested that Texas needed to redistrict to get as many as potentially 5 more Republican-leaning seats. The legislature, at least the Texas House, has done that in the past week. The Texas Senate still has to vote. And so the governor of California, Gavin Newsom, said, well, I don't agree with that. I don't think that's right. So if you do that, here in California, we're going to try and change our system so we can also do a mid-cycle redistricting and draw 5 more Democratic-leaning seats to counterbalance that. That has led to other states on both sides of the aisle Indiana looking at it, New York, and now in Florida, where House Speaker Daniel Perez has launched a redistricting select committee to look at congressional redistricting. We don't know, Kent, yet what the pace of that will be, whether that will occur or not. Florida's already fairly, we just redrew these lines 3 years ago, already fairly tilted, 20 Republican seats, 8 Democratic seats here in the state. But with a legislative session coming up quickly, remember in 2026, they meet from January to March. So this does appear to be something they're trying to put on the radar screen, possibly redrawing this map so that it can be in place for the 2026 elections.
And as we wrap up this segment, one of the differences maybe for Florida, we heard the governor saying this week, hey, we're going to petition to add another congressional seat because our population has risen and so on. So certainly something we'll be watching. All right, Chris is staying with us. And I'll tell you what, if you're not familiar with the Governor's Medal of Freedom in Florida, it's a pretty good chance you're familiar with at least one of the latest recipients. Stay with us for the local connections on this statewide honor next on This Week in Jacksonville.
You're watching This Week in Jacksonville on Channel 4.
Governor Ron DeSantis has posthumously recognized 5 iconic Floridians with the state's highest civilian honor, the Governor's Medal of Freedom. He recognized Jimmy Buffett, former South Florida Congressman Lincoln Diaz-Balart, former Governor and U.S. Senator Bob Graham, former Lieutenant Governor and then Governor Buddy McKay, and former state lawmaker and Florida State University President John Thrasher. The Governor's Medal of Freedom was established just in 2020. It allows the governor to recognize anyone who has made an especially meritorious contribution to the interest and citizens of the state. Bobby Bowden, by the way, was the first recipient. Chris Hand is with us. He's been involved in Florida politics a long time, and you made a great point that John Thrasher, not the only Florida legend who was honored this week. Tell me some of your interactions with any of these 5 that I just mentioned there.
Well, as you know, and we've talked about on the show before, I mean, I was very fortunate. Bob Graham was my mentor and my boss, co-author, and of course, a very close friend. He passed away in 2024. Really just a phenomenal statesman, leader, human being. I also had the great privilege to be the research assistant for Governor Buddy McKay when I was in law school. So had the great fortune to get to know him well.
I didn't know that connection.
Yeah, and he and his amazing family as well, and of course the amazing Graham family. So, and interesting the connections between some of these people as well. Obviously, Senator Graham and Governor McKay were kind of the same vintage of Florida politics, so they worked very closely together. They were in the legislature together and continued to work closely together when they held statewide positions. Obviously, House Speaker and President John Thrasher, what an interesting career, both in elective office, but then as a university president. You've had children at FSU, I have a child there now. You really walk across that campus, Kent, and you feel his legacy. The work he did as president to both generate revenue and then invest that in kind of rebuilding the physical plant to make that really just one of the most impressive campuses anywhere, not just in the state of Florida. And then, of course, Representative Lincoln Diaz-Balart, who was a stalwart in Congress for many years, just very active on issues of foreign policy. He was of Cuban heritage, so focused on those issues a lot, built strong bipartisan relationships. And then, of course, last but certainly not least, the amazing, unforgettable Jimmy Buffett, who died in 2023, but who had close relationships with some of these other people, including Senator Graham. He and Jimmy Buffett were very good friends. In fact, one year at the governor's press skits when Bob Graham was governor, the skit was Bob Graham played Jimmy Buffett and Jimmy Buffett played Bob Graham.
No kidding.
So Jimmy Buffett walked out in a suit like the one Governor Graham would have worn, and Bob Graham walked out in a Hawaiian shirt, a straw hat, and very badly playing a guitar. And there's great video out there of that press skits where they switched roles. They were very close friends. They formed the Save the Manatee Club together.
Certainly something Buffett was known for,
Yeah.
the environmental protection kind of efforts that he made as an advocate for that.
And he and Bob Graham were partners in that effort, were very close friends. So there's a lot of connections between these 5, and they truly were great Floridians. It was a very appropriate announcement for the governor to make.
Did you get a chance to meet or interact with Jimmy Buffett because of your connection with Senator Graham?
No, I did not get to know him well as a result of that, but Senator Graham certainly knew him well. I've been to a number of Jimmy Buffett concerts, so I feel like I know him through that. But he and Bob Graham were close friends. But I was very lucky to get to know both Senator Graham and Governor McKay well, and to also observe the statesmanship and the leadership of these other individuals as well, whether that's President Thrasher, Representative Diaz-Balart, and certainly enjoy all of the impact that Jimmy Buffett had on our state.
Yeah, sure. And more than just music, but certainly
Exactly.
put a focus on Florida with some of the artistic things that Jimmy Buffett brought. And I got to know John Thrasher, probably earliest among that, but I certainly appreciate that over the years you got me in contact with Senator Graham. For people on this list that you may have had interactions with, there's just a feeling you have, and usually a pretty positive one when it comes to some of the folks that we're talking about here.
Absolutely.
We're out of time, Chris, but boy, we're going to let you go, but you and I should just go and talk some more, tell some more
Exactly.
stories about
Enjoy that, yeah.
these Florida heroes. Chris, thanks for the time today.
Kent, great to see you as always.
All right, so I'm Kent Justice. Thanks for watching On Air on Channel 4 and the CW17. Of course, you'll find us online at news4jax.com and then streaming on News4Jax Plus. All right, coming up, Congressman John Rutherford and political analyst Rick Mullaney. They're scheduled to join us next time. Don't forget to check out This Week in Jacksonville Business Edition, too. I'd appreciate it because you're going to find new episodes of our podcast every Thursday at 9 a.m., and you'll find it right now on News4Jax Plus under the channel This Week in Jacksonville. You also find This Week in Jacksonville Business Edition available wherever you find your podcasts, like Apple, Spotify, or YouTube.
See why every day more people are choosing News 4 Jax, Northeast Florida and South Georgia's #1 source for local news.